Get started. Good morning. Jennifer says hello too. We will be finishing up the chapter on media history finally next week, and we'll do a test. This week we'll just have a couple of talks and an extra credit. Hold on. Sorry about that. Welcome to the real world. I have some plumbing issues. Anyway, what we're going to do, extra credit, this one extra credit question I'll post on Wednesday. We will finish up broadcasting at the moment, and we'll do broadcasting and TV this week, movies and the internet next week, and then do a test. Anyway, so that's what's up and coming. Let's do the share screen. Okay, history, broadcasting from okay. We started, I showed you that movie last time because there's so much in it about how these things happen. It's not one person, it is many people fighting over it and fighting over patents. Really, broadcasting begins with Morse code and the telegraph, because that's instant communication. Then we have radio waves, and then Marconi. Marconi, whose idea was to have the wireless be like the telegraph. He didn't think of Morse code. I mean, he thought of Morse code, he never thought of it as broadcasting.
With this telegraph, a device invented way back in the mid-1800s, I can communicate with you, even if you're hundreds of miles away. I can update you on stock prices, or the movements of enemy troops, or who's going to the next week on RuPaul's Drag Race. What's harder to do is make you laugh, tell you a long story, sing you this metal song I wrote, or show you this hilarious cat who's terrified of this toy rabbit. It's adorable, trust me. For that more emotional audiovisual mode of communication, let's ditch the telegraph and leverage some basic scientific discoveries about sound, light, and electricity made during the 19th century. The telephone, invented in the 1860s and 70s, took personal communication to the next level. Both Scottish-Canadian inventor Alexander Graham Bell and American engineer Elisha Gray created working telephone systems in 1876, and the priority dispute between them is fascinating. But the telephone didn't lend itself to popular entertainment. It was a one-on-one technology, not a way of communicating to the masses. So it wasn't until the invention of commercial sound recorders and motion picture cameras in the late 1800s that you could consume the same media as other people around the globe. And for those devices, we need to head back to the Menlo Park laboratory of Thomas Edison, who was, by the way, also working on the telephone. Edison developed the phonograph, which literally means sound writing, in 1877, shortly before the light bulb and electrical power system that made him famous. Maybe Edison was interested in recording, amplifying, and playing back sounds because he was hard of hearing. He might have imagined alternative strategies for recording that hearing people wouldn't have thought of. Edison's team invented a recording cylinder which offered good sound quality. It worked by vibrating a thin membrane wrapped around the cylinder and then amplifying those vibrations, or making them louder. But other inventors created the commercially popular record, a big flat disc that stores audio information easily by using the ridges to encode sound waves. Either way, phonographs are pretty simple and durable and still in use. All of you long play collecting vinyl heads are enjoying a fancier version version of the phonograph every time you start your turntable. Edison's cylinders were originally used mostly for office dictation by big companies and had little impact on the consumer market. In fact, Edison invented a lot of stuff that consumers would either ignore or outright despise. Probably the funniest example of an Edison fail was the talking doll created in 1890.
We don't need to hear about Edison.
And was never seen again. So, Thought Bubble, show us how Edison made movie magic.
We don't need to talk about movies too much until next week. The real thing we want to talk about, okay, broadcasting.
And detect electromagnetic waves. His work led directly to the radio. Today we measure the frequencies of electromagnetic waves in units called hertz. Radio waves, the longest type of electromagnetic wave, are measured in kilohertz, megahertz, or gigahertz. Inspired by Hertz's research, a young Italian inventor-engineer named Guglielmo Marconi worked in the 1890s on how to send telegrams wirelessly. Many people were interested in wireless communication, but it was Marconi who first developed a working system. At home in Bologna, he sent and received the first radio signals. Soon after, Marconi traveled to Britain to commercialize his system. By 1899, he sent the first wireless telegraph signal across the English Channel. And by 1901, he was able to send a single letter, S, across the Atlantic Ocean from England to Newfoundland, Canada. In this humble, sibilant way, radio was born. And so Marconi won the Nobel Prize in 1909. In fact, Nikola Tesla developed a working radio system even before Marconi, but it was Marconi's that took off commercially. That process did take a while. Regular radio broadcasts began in 1920 in Pittsburgh at the 100-watt station KDKA, and the British Broadcasting Corporation created the first radio network in 1922. Radio broadcasts soared in popularity and became profitable thanks to advertising. By 1936, 3/4 of American households owned a radio. Unlike a telephone, a radio worked without laying expensive copper wires, so this invention and the automobile connected cities to rural areas and changed how people consumed music and sports. Radio also became a tool of political propaganda and an indispensable way of communicating important news. The greatest example of this occurred on October 30th, 1938, when Orson Welles directed an adaptation of H.G. Wells's novel, The War of the Worlds, in which terrifying Martians invade Earth and subdue humanity. Some people didn't understand that this was a drama. Maybe they flipped on midway through and mistook the realistic radio announcements for actual news, causing a panic. As radio was taking off, television was invented and built on the infrastructure that was supported.
Okay, we'll get to TV next time. Okay, and then, the people became aware through the Titanic that radio could be an important tool to save people. Broadcasting, DeForest and Fessenden, early 1900, came up with the idea of using that same technology in different ways. Broadcasting, not just one-to-one, but to many people. 1910, David Sarnoff starts RCA, Radio Corporation of America. He started to build the radios rather than, and then we started broadcasting to have something to be put on them, not unlike the phone. I mean, or an iPad. Did you know you needed the iPad before you saw one? No. Radio then comes in, the recorded music industry goes in the toilet. First radio station, 1920. 1927, the FCC steps in. The government says, well, not everybody could be 81.1 on the FM dial. 1926, and CBS in 28, the radio network, the broadcasting network begins. Before then, every station had its own announcers, its own bands, its own shows, but with a network, you have one show, one band, one announcer that could reach multiple stations. It was a lot cheaper. Radio really took off in the 1930s. All the genres we see today, sitcoms, soap, cop shows, game shows, all come from radios. We'll talk about Edward R. Murrow shortly. Invented radio news. Advertising. God opened you the world. Comedians, you see, the point is all the stuff we see on TV comes from radio. Politicians see the power of radio, especially this guy.
Want to know what other guys are saying about RexMD.com?
This was my first time using telemedicine, and I'd recommend this process to anyone. The total experience was amazing. I couldn't be happier with the product.
Here's how RexMD.com works. Just fill out a brief survey. And if appropriate, you can try a sample pack of ED medication, which are currently available to new customers. Your consultation is free. There's no copays, no doctor office visits, and your shipping is always free. Sample pack prescriptions of ED medication are now available at RexMD.com.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Here was this aristocrat from Dutchess County, confined to a wheelchair, Harvard educated, but because of his almost innate sense of communication skills and the medium of radio, he was transported into the living rooms of almost every home in America. And in our household, FDR was a demigod. He was the voice that always gave them hope. My parents really worshiped FDR. And it was not just because of policies, they felt connected to him because of that great warm radio voice and that amazing ability that he had to speak directly to the fears and the hopes of the American people.
I can assure you that it is safer for you to keep your money in a reopened bank than to keep it under the mattress.
FDR and the Great Depression and the New Deal was an amazing time because FDR was about establishing hope, trying to bring hope back to life for people that were caught in this unbelievably
Yeah, the Depression came and people were afraid. It was
chaos and stress.
In a lot
FDR
of
who
ways,
just said,
FDR was
let's
actually an
stay
extremely unlikely figure to
and trust our
become a sort of
institutions.
moral and visionary leader in the ways that he did.
We'll revive and we'll prosper.
So anytime we examine the New Deal, the legislation that
All the
FDR
stuff we have
initiated, FDR
today,
came along and
the
determined
Social
this
Security,
they've gone for.
Medicare,
And
all
interestingly,
came from this
Social
guy,
Security,
Social
for public works
Security.
programs.
Now, a
the
lot of people say
WPA,
that's socialism.
the
Still,
various other
He
agricultural
was able to
programs,
get
which
away
became
with it
critically
because
important
he was on
to the
every
restoration of
radio,
American
he was in
agriculture.
everybody's house, and he understood the importance of radio. Then we have the guy who invented radio news, Edward R. Murrow, who was a debater in high school and college, and then he was hired to start radio news from CBS, and this is what he sounded like. Huh. Anyway.
fan out in all directions from here. And down on one street, I can see a single red light. And just faintly, the outline of a sign standing in the middle of the street. And again, I know what that sign says because I saw it this afternoon. It says, danger, unexploded bomb. Off to my left still, I can see.
So he would be describing what things were really like, kind of putting you there while you're sitting in the dark here in Chattanooga. And at the same time, these guys are using broadcasting to rile up the crowds. Movies, they had radio, they controlled everything, and all you hear was Nazis are good and the Jews are bad. All the radio, all the time. It's media for propaganda. You get the idea. After World War II, NBC gets so big it splits into red and blue. Blue becomes ABC. Listenership declines on the radio because you have this other thing, television. Television comes in, so radio goes back to change, going from sitcoms and soap operas to music. And what kind of music? Rock and roll. So here's all sort of stuff that you can look at about rock and roll. The difference is, here's a little bit about what rock and roll is about.
Says my mama done told me this, and my papa too.
It comes from
Don't
black
let the
music.
40 low make a fool of you. Tell me.
This man in Woodville, Mississippi, plays and sings the blues as it might have been done in the Mississippi Delta country of the Old South 70 years ago. His heritage is African, but he is a part of America's musical tradition.
I took my hat and took a seat. I said, I hope I hadn't stepped upon a seat. I asked her name, then lost scared me half to death.
This man, recording a song in a New York studio, stems from a musical heritage that is European.
Stop, 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 went my heart.
But anyway, what do we get from rock and roll? It's country, it's black music, it's marginal people, it's new music that only kids.
This couple from the mountains of West Virginia perform in a style.
You get the point. Rock and roll is new music. And the term rock and roll describes a sex act. So it's black music, it's sex, it's country, and it's a secret that only the kids have. 1960s, radio comes back, FM comes in, music becomes part of young people. NPR starts in 1969. 1980s, we have rap and hip hop. 1980, MTV. Radio music has to have a look, and radio goes to TV. Internet, satellite radio. And today's issues, it is narrow. You have different little markets. It's fragmented. We have different audiences. We use it for background, public affairs, issues in modern radio. Again, fragmentation. It's not like the old days where everybody listens to FDR or Edward R. Murrow. You listen, you have gospel, you have Christian, you have country, you have urban contemporary. Mechanization, they call it jack radio, where you have not a real DJ, but a robot playing your stuff. The economics of radio is changing. It's still all advertising, but you get the radio on the phone. You can get it many times. And here we go. And there's a lot of it on the internet. It's changing, but it's always with us. Anyway, I'll do a quick beginning to TV since we have a few more minutes. TV follows radio, also a mass medium. The difference is it's visual. Radio lets you use your imagination. Television needs a picture, which is why you see a lot of fires and explosions, because they're good pictures. They affect sports. How do they affect sports? NFL and NBA look good on TV. Soccer and hockey, not so much. Politics. Our speakers have to speak short. They have to have good hair. They have our social, we have our social lives. They've changed. We all watch television. Early television sets the social agenda. Things like rock and roll, how to look, how to dress, and it made radio decline. Early television. There was really two kinds of TV, mechanical and electronic.
The Bachelor is back. Stream it live on ABC with YouTube TV.
Who invented the electric socks? That was the mechanical version. You shine a light through it and you have these discs. Picture was not that great. Let's see if I can get a picture. You had the spinning disc version. Shortly. Really wasn't that good. What worked better was a version called electronic television.
My great-grandfather really was the most famous man no one's ever heard of.
The guy who invented electronic television.
Folks out there.
It's what we use today.
Is this some kind of a machine that
Okay, here's how it works.
It's hard to imagine the world my great-grandfather was born into in 1906. No computers, no cell phones, no cars, no airplanes, and certainly no television. When he was growing up in a log cabin in rural Utah, his primetime entertainment was staring at the moon and dreaming of the future. An electric generator and a stack of science fiction magazines fueled young Philo's imagination. Then, in 1920, at the age of 14, while harrowing a field behind a team of horses, he had a revelation. If he could train an electron.
See, you'd have these lines going across the field, and he's sitting on a mountain watching him plow a field and going, whoa, mind blown television.
To do what horses were doing and go to the end of a row, turn around, and start over, he could send pictures through the air. The next year, he entered high school, and he tried to talk his way into a senior science class by describing his dream of an all-electronic television. His teacher had no idea what he was talking about, but agreed to tutor him and saved the very first drawing of a television camera. By 19, Phil had attracted investors, built a lab in San Francisco, and proposed to his sweetheart, Elma.
He says, there's another woman in my life. Well,
Yep, and it was television.
On September 7th, 1927, with my great-grandma at his side taking notes, Philo successfully transmitted an electronic image for the first time.
I was so excited. I was dancing around, and Phil was, I knew from the shaking hands that he was very emotionally impacted. But he said, well, there you've got television. That was what he said. The backers said, Farnsworth, when are we going to see some money in this thing? Phil had painted a dollar sign on the slide.
See some money in
and
this
that's the
thing?
first
That's
thing
the
they
first
saw.
television picture.
It was a dollar sign.
Dollar sign. Here you can see some money on it. His investors did it.
Was to keep live pictures going on television yet. We had everything from trained dogs and bears.
Which is all well and good.
By the light of the same home.
So yeah, he really put it together. But, and here's early television.
To be broadcast and picked up by receiving sets where the routine is reversed. The radio impulses becoming points of light that appear on the screen as pictures. 30 pictures are completed every second. These pictures are composed of 200,000 light points.
Okay, so that's Farnsworth's idea. But
The most fanciful dream of mankind is today a startling.
while he's making it, somebody else is working on it at the same time. David Sarnoff at NBC.
Reality, destined to become the world's most popular science.
The RCA said, no person, no boy of 15 could come up with that complicated concept. So Phil went.
One man can't do that all by himself. And they sued and said he's a
to the
fake.
patent office, and he said, we need a ruling on this. They asked Phil if he.
And what they did is they showed that drawing when he was 14 years old.
Chemistry teacher, Justin
Came forward and
Tolman,
said, yes,
produced
he really did it.
a page of Phil's
And
notebook
that
where
gave
Phil had
Farnsworth the patent. Then World War II happens, not much goes on with TV.
probably his patents would be expiring before that ended or right around shortly after. And this was very depressing to him.
Yep, his patents expire. NBC makes all the TVs, and he's just some little guy in San Francisco. And they buy him out, and he's largely
He had
forgotten.
put his whole soul and life into getting television to the public.
Phil Farnsworth continued to invent. He earned over 300 patents worldwide. If his atomic fuser had been successful, we might all be flying around in nuclear cars by now. He should be a household name, but despite a cartoon descendant on Futurama, he's not. Unfortunately, Philo T. Farnsworth never profited from his invention. He was squeezed out and did not participate in the growth and development.
Yep, NBC took it over. People with the money David Sarnoff got ahead. RCI wins battle and TV takes off. Anyway, we'll do the modern TV era and start into movies next time. Appreciate it. Sorry, really, really appreciate it. Okay, thank you for showing up, and we will talk about more stuff next time. Thanks for showing up.